Yes, hello. Welcome to the launch of the Climate Positive Alliance Europe. I'm Ursula Hartenberger. I'm going to be the moderator throughout this session. First of all, a few housekeeping rules. This webinar will be in two parts, essentially. So there will be the introduction to the organization, to CPEA. You will have opportunity to ask a few questions after the first part. Then we'll go into a more content-orientated panel around some of the focus areas that CPEA will be working on. And in between, there will be, as I said, a short break where you can ask questions about CPEA, and then there will be another opportunity to ask questions about the work program. Just in terms of data protection, we are recording this this webinar, and seeing that this is our official launch, and we would have loved to do this in person, and we can't. And if we'd done it in person, we would have taken a nice group photo. So we would like to take a group photo after the introduction to CPEA. If you don't want to be in the group photo, you just have to switch your camera off. It's relatively easy. In terms of asking questions, you can either use the chat or you can raise your hand, and we will monitor both channels of questioning coming in. But without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Christine Lemaitre, Bruno Sauer, and Peter Engert, who are the CEOs of the three Green Building Councils, who are the founding members of CPEA, in addition to REHVA. So, Christina, would you like to start?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, hello, welcome our audience.
Welcome from my side as well. We're very excited that that day is finally here. We've been working quite intensive to make that happen. But before I start with the introduction, I'd like to hand over to Peter for his welcome remark.
Hello, I'm Peter Engert, CEO of the Austrian Green Building Council, ÖGNI. Greetings from Vienna, and we wish you a very interesting afternoon.
Thank you. And then, since we're a European organization, now all the way to Valencia in Spain, Bruno.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, I'm Bruno Sauer, CEO Green Building Council Spain, España. Speaking from Valencia with a rainy weather. It's a pity, but I should have been in Madrid now, where it's sunny. But okay, I suppose the contents of the presentation of today will be shiny and happy enough to clear up everything over here. So this evening I will have sun over here. Thanks. Welcome.
And now you know how the weather in Germany is at the moment as well.
I know.
Thank you very much. Raphael, could you put the next slide on, please? Now, a bit about the background, how this initiative came about. Bruno, do you want to tell our audience how we actually arrived at Climate Positive Europe Alliance?
Well, Climate Positive Europe Alliance is something which was born out of some events, some meetings, some moments of really trying to brainstorm and bring leaders together on the European level, which we called in 2018 G17, G referring to the goal number 17 of the SDGs, and making an alliance. And we had some initiatives among several green building councils in Europe to bring together people from different parts of the building sector and to discuss and to think on where should we go to, really with the aim to fulfill or to help or to accelerate to reach all these goals which are somewhere defined in the SDGs. So that was an initial starting point, not trying to settle a large organization, something with a very heavy structure. We just want to be very smooth and direct and bring people together. That was the initial aim. And out of these movements, we said, yeah, maybe it's a moment that with all that knowledge, we should be able to influence a little bit more on a higher level, on a more institutional level, and then the idea came up to create what is CPEA. So that was the beginning, 2018, if I remember correctly. No, Christine?
Yes, maybe if I take over from there, yeah. And like Bruno said, and we were all inspired basically by the SDGs, and in our opinion, the most powerful one, the number 17, collaboration for the goals. And this is something we're all very passionate about, to collaborate on the European level and to work together. More as a bottom-up approach, from really coming from the market, discussing different solutions. And we've done a series of events and workshops as a loose network, G17. And then the Corona pandemic kind of got our plans mixed. And in that sequence of events, we thought, well, we need to maybe, and then we can go to the next slide, not change the idea and not change the vision, but make it a little bit more formal. And this is why we decided to create the Climate Positive Alliance Europe, an NGO registered in Belgium as a non-profit think tank that basically does exactly what we started with G17, but bring it together on a more professional level and on the European level in a more official way. So we're still a network of like-minded professionals, but hopefully now a little bit more professional. As Ursula mentioned, we're the 4 founding members at the moment, but we're looking for expanding the network, inviting all of you to join in. So basically the German Sustainable Building Council, the GVC España, the EUGNI and REHVA took the initiative and made the call to set up this organization. And who we are as a team, if you go to the next slide, we introduced ourselves already, and I think a big part of being more professional from now on and maybe being steered in the right direction is that Ursula decided to join this a little bit sometimes chaotic club of ours and to bring some more direction in our work. So we're very happy that she agreed to be the Secretary General of CPEA. She's based in Brussels, and she will basically be in charge of the operational work we're doing. Frank Hovoka was kind enough to be taking over the treasurer role, watching the money coming from a long history of a career in finance. So I think he's the best fit for that. And Bruno Sauer and I decided to take the role of the chair and the vice chair in order to hopefully support and represent our ideas and to bring the whole idea forward. So if you go to the next slide, I'd like to give back to Bruno to maybe as well for the ones of you who don't know us and who were not part of the G17 network so far, to get some insight in what our mission and vision of CPEA is. Yeah,
thanks, Christine. As this is something that's really coming out of Green Building Council mindset. And as Green Building Council, we mainly work towards the transformation of the whole building sector towards a sustainable model. When you lift this up to a European level, the initial mission is not changing. I mean, we are still have our mission as let's try to work in a collaborative way to transform the market towards a climate positive Europe in this case. It's a clear goal, 2050. We should be there before, and that requires quite a lot of action. We always work from that spirit of collaboration, trying to be transparent, horizontal, cross-sectorial, which is very important. It is the building sector is very complex. There are many agents and many stakeholders, and all of them should be present in the dialogue. So in that sense, what we do is working really from the market, from down, listening to all the people who have to have an opinion and should have an input to the discussion, and then bringing together all that knowledge, most of the times bringing that towards a report or something like that, and start multiplying so that the impact is bigger. Next slide, please. what makes it slightly different towards maybe other initiatives or non-for-profit organizations, and I think on the European level, I think we're quite unique on that, is that we share the same vision on how do you measure sustainability. I mean, you can only improve and change the market if you're able to say in a more or less objective and scientific way where we are and where we should we go to. You know? So in that sense, we share between these different green building councils a certain methodology based on the DGNB certification system, in which we clearly say, as a European way of looking to sustainability, that should be the way we have our reference values, and we establish a vision towards the future. So every initiative that we will somewhere will undertake the coming months and years will be data driven. I mean, we should measure and based on a certain kind of methodology of measuring. So if you go to next slide, then we hope to reach in short or mid-term time that we can transmit clearly to public administration and to the market, to the private market, that there are certain aspects which are really, really urgent to be studied or investigated, or we should have that think tank mentality. And that can change the coming years, but on this moment there are four main items, which is sustainable finance, circular economy, buildings and the SDGs, and then the building data information, which are the four big fields that we will be working on. We already did a powerful report and work on the sustainable finance taxonomy. Next step will be introducing the ESGs. There is already some work done on the SDGs. Circular economy, we have quite a lot of experience from the last 10, 12 years, but there's still quite a lot of work to be done. And the very important element, which is the blue circle, which is the building data information, is as long as we can't bring together somewhere all the knowledge in a common platform or a common place where we can find some objective information on sustainability, it's very difficult to give guidance to other people or to parts of the market. So next slide. This is what described more or less in what the previous figure was showing. In sustainable finance, we did work on the marquee readiness of the taxonomy, and we will present some results next week. I think in all different countries we will present the results also. So it's always the idea of working on a European level and then bringing it back to your national context. Buildings and the SDGs is very high level, but we know that there's a gap. We know that many people understand it, but there's not really touching earth, being practical. How can we really as a building sector fulfill all these goals? The circular economy is how do we consider our buildings and the urban fabrics as a new material mine? How can we get there the primary material for the future? And the building data information, that's a little bit the heart and the knowledge of the whole organization that we will start building up to become a reference into a European context and sustainability. Christine, do you want to take those two last slides before we go into the more content focused panel discussion?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, first activities, well, today is the virtual official launch event of CPEA, and as of now, the website is live. So maybe you should write it down. CPEA.eu is the website address, and keep watching it closely, because these are just a few activities, but for concrete dates and more activities, since we always have a lot of ideas, please look at the website and let us know if you want to get involved. We will offer taxonomy checks based on the taxonomy study Bruno just mentioned. We have the German event tomorrow at 10 a.m. So there are still some spots available for this online event. So the moment the final criteria are released, we will offer a taxonomy check for buildings. We will start, we call it a knowledge program, but basically a program mixed of webinars, education, but as well knowledge sharing offers. And we will in the next weeks kick off the European ESG working group. We will hear a little bit more about during this session. So how to get involved? If you go to the next slide, we decided, since we're now in the startup phase and times are still crazy and chaotic due to the corona pandemic, and it's very difficult to plan. So we have decided that a membership model will be introduced 2022. So everything we start this year is basically free of charge. So we're looking for expanding the network, bringing like-minded people together, supporting us, working together, are interested into knowledge sharing. So we're looking for network partners, which are basically organizations such as associations or NGOs or foundation on the European or global level. We're looking as well for supporters of the alliance who are, and this is the only prerequisite, already member of the DGNB, the GBC España or the EUGNI, are very welcome to become an alliance supporter. And once we start to do real concrete projects based on the work we're doing in a working group, or if we, like we did with the taxonomy study, want to do a marketability study or something like a concrete project, everyone who basically is a partner is welcome to join in. And then the costs will be defined based on the kind of work we're doing. So we're inviting all of you to get involved, to become part of the network, to start working with us, developing with us, sharing solutions. I think this is the most pressing time we're at the moment. So we need this different kind of collaboration and the solution-oriented knowledge sharing approach. So thank you from my side. And if there are any questions, please feel free. And I hand over to Ursula.
Yeah, thank you, Christina. As I said before, if you are, can you still hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, good, because people keep getting error messages here. If you do have any questions about CPEA, now's the time to ask, either in the chat or you can raise your hand. But as I announced earlier, we would like to have a launch photograph. So if you could switch on your webcams, if you don't want to, that's absolutely fine. But those of you who are happy to have their photograph taken, we would appreciate if you could now switch on your webcam, so we have an official launch picture in Corona times.
Let's see whether this is.
I mean, Raphael, you seen anybody?
Yeah, I was afraid. I'm afraid there's no option for them for our guests to turn on the camera. I think if you raise your hand, I think that would allow for you to switch that on. Just I'm afraid that this can only work for the organizers and our supporters in this webinar format.
Sorry for having raised your hopes of being on photograph on screen.
Now
but,
everyone got ready already and changed.
Exactly, and they all got excited and did their hair. Well, never mind. So we now know that for GoToWebinar we cannot have any group photos. With some other platforms that is possible, but that's a good one to know for the future. If there aren't any questions, then I'd like to move on to the panel discussion, where we have three presentations, and you are very privileged in getting a sneak preview of the final results of the taxonomy market readiness study, because the official launch will only be tomorrow. This is kind of hot off the press, and the full study will be on the CPEA website as of tomorrow. So watch out and watch this space. And without any further ado, then I'd like to invite the first panelist, Anna Browner, who's Head of Research and Development at the DGNB. Anna holds a degree in Environmental Engineering at the Technical University of Berlin and at the École Polytechnique Fédérale de Lausanne. She's worked for different consulting companies in the field of sustainability and building services engineering. From 2004 to 2007, she held a position as research assistant at the University of Stuttgart in the Department of Life Cycle Engineering, and where she also did her PhD. And Anna is initiator and founding member of the DGNB, and she served as a CEO from DGB's foundation in 2007 until the end of 2008, and then she did a stint as a consultant, and then she came back in 2015, and she's now responsible for DGNB's research and development and leads on the development of the DGNB system. And most recently, she has carried out the assessment of the EU Finance Action Plan's taxonomy. And also she's been instrumental in the implementation of the EU levels framework into DGNB's activities and the development of DGNB's framework for climate neutral cities, buildings and sites. So Anna, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. This is very nice. What's the latest news from our work? So actually, Raphael, if you could please switch. Yeah. So during the last half year, we did a study together with the Danish, the Austrian, the Spanish Council, and we evaluated actually the EU Taxonomy screening criteria for sustainable finance for the buildings. And because we were curious, next please. We were curious whether the proposed criteria, the technical criteria, were applicable and whether the market is ready for these criteria. This presentation is not giving you an insight into the taxonomy as it is or what the criteria exactly are, but if you have heard of it and maybe you are already a little bit in the technical details, then you might have heard that there is some rumors and discussion whether or not this upcoming regulation is really already, I would say, market ready. Next, please. So we did this study. We wanted to evaluate the market readiness and the applicability of the criteria based on real case studies. We also wanted to build up capacities within the market participants organization, because we knew that it's all about knowledge as well. We were all curious about effort, cost, and also the advantages of implementing such sustainability information into processes. And of course, we wanted to derive recommendations for the European Commission, and that recommendation was meant to be really fact-based and not just based on thinking. Next, please. So we could convince more than 20 participants to join the study. We started this study prepared the study in July last year, and had the first meeting in September. And the participants, as you can see, they both represented the demand and also the offering side. So there are pension funds and banks, but also investors, developers, building owners, asset owners, management companies, and so on. So it was quite representative. So, and this was really one of the big positive parts of the study, that we could work with not just one specific group, but with a range of organizations dealing with sustainability and the taxonomy throughout the whole value chain of buildings. Next, please. The buildings that we looked at were located throughout Europe. So although we worked with companies being active in the 4 countries of ours, we could manage to get a good overview actually on European representativeness as well. As you can see, there's not just Spain or Denmark, Germany, or Austria, but quite wide range. And we could also look at buildings in all 3 related activities: new construction, renovation, and acquisition and ownership part. The types of buildings were office and residential and retail. And so we could also say that this was quite representative. Next, please. The most tangible results of the study that we've finalized actually today, I would say, because I just received the message that the last part of the study, the report, is ready now. So the tangible results is the final report that is going to be released tomorrow. We also derived recommendations to the European Commission, which we handed over to the Commission in December as part of our consultation. And then the third part was confidential company-specific reports, where we could give sort of the results to the participating companies with initial recommendations: what to do, how to set up good structures, where to investigate, and so on. Next, please. The main result, one of the main results, was that we could see that the new construction and the renovation projects had the least difficulties in proving the criteria. The criteria we looked at were, by the way, the ones for climate change mitigation criteria. And we took the technical expert group's recommendation mixed with the November draft delegated act assessment. The non-eligibility of most buildings was unavailable data for do no significant harm criteria. As for the acquisition and ownership part, we could see that only 1/3 of the buildings could prove eligibility for 1/3 of the criteria. And they were also very often non-eligible in the climate change mitigation, so the main criteria, due to either low performance, missing benchmarks, or then also data gaps in the do no significant harm criteria. Next, please. We looked at the also whether or not the buildings were certified, and more than nearly half of the buildings came with a DGNB certification or LEED or BREEAM, and those could prove their eligibility, their overall eligibility more often. They also performed better and had data of much better quality that was much better accessible and required less time and effort. We also looked at the time and effort needed for each and every criteria. So if you're curious about this, please read the report by tomorrow. Next, please. As for new construction, what was quite interesting is, so we evaluated on the one hand side an overall grade of eligibility of all criteria. There was no single building that fulfilled all criteria and could be called fully eligible, but there were quite many that were highly eligible, I would say. And since you can see on the lower graph, we evaluated the eligibility and non-eligibility, and also whether or not data was available or not. So if data was not available, it didn't mean that it's not eligible, but it means that maybe with more effort, more time, eligibility could be given. So we could see that in new construction, for example, the climate change mitigation criteria was fulfilled quite often. But the climate change adaptation and pollution criteria was really a problem for most of the participants. We could also see that residential buildings had more data, could prove their eligibility, smaller buildings performed better. And with regards to countries, it was interesting that the Danish projects, for example, could fulfill most of the do no significant harm requirements due to high market standards. Next, please. As for renovation, these were only 4 buildings, but anyways, it was quite interesting to see that the climate change mitigation criteria was fulfilled by all, but again, adaptation and pollution and also the circular economy criteria was quite a hurdle for them. Next, please. And now the interesting part of acquisition and ownership, so the existing building stock. We could see that a lot of difficulties in proving eligibility for our market participants was there. Only 1 building was rated fully eligible, and only every 6th building could fulfill more than 2/3 of all criteria. It was mainly due to the climate change mitigation criteria, which was a big difficulty for most of the buildings. On the one hand side, due to not being as performing as the criteria wanted, but also due to missing data. The do no significant harm criteria, as you could see, they were really difficult to be proven, and most of the buildings were non-eligible because of most of the do no significant harm criteria. If I could see the slides, please, Raphael. The certified buildings in this case, again, were more likely to prove the eligibility. And yeah, I think this is quite it. And the newer buildings, of course, performed better mainly. And we could prove this, that they were more likely to be eligible. Next, please. Next slide, please. So as a summary, I would say we have 3 main observations that you can see below. So for new buildings and renovations, the climate change mitigation criteria does not seem to be too ambitious, but the do no significant harm criteria are a high burden for many. The second observation is that half of the new buildings, but only 15% of the assessed existing buildings could fulfill a higher degree of the criteria, so at least 2/3. And then the last observation is that the certified buildings could prove the eligibility really more often. They performed better and provided data of higher quality and much lower time, lesser time. So the recommendations for the Commission, on the one hand side, is what is really needed is a roadmap for the taxonomy so that the market participants can prepare themselves. Secondly, for the Commission, it is really crucial to improve some of the criteria, for example, for the climate change mitigation and the acquisition and ownership criteria. The percentages or the benchmarks are a big difficulty for many, and that a balance between the climate change mitigation and the do no significant harm criteria should probably be done to stimulate the market. the climate change adaptation criteria, which is very important, seem to be, there needs to be some improvement, we could say. And then the recognition of certification schemes, this is targeted at the Commission as well, is really something that would speed up the whole transformation. And then we have some recommendations for the market participants. You need to prepare for the upcoming regulation, but don't get panicked. So there is enough time. It is not too much of a burden. It's more a question of effort and not so much on whether or not you will be able to do this. But still, you should invest into the transition of existing buildings. So we need to have more good buildings from a perspective of climate change mitigation criteria. Then secondly, you need to build up in-house capacities, store your relevant data accordingly during all acquisition and management processes, and use certification schemes, for example, for the buildings in use to improve your buildings. And then lastly, the recognition of certification schemes as when it comes to lower effort, higher reliability, and more holistic, future-proof performance is something that you should think of new if you haven't considered it yet. And with this, I'm closing. So the question was, next slide, please, whether or not the proposed criteria are applicable and if the market is ready. Next, partly, it's a typical scientific answer, yes and no, so partly. So the market definitely needs to be better prepared and some criteria need improvement, but there's no clear, the criteria are not good enough or the market is not, so it's both. So, and with this, I'm closing, and I thank all GBCs and their team members who have participated in the study, who have supported, who have done all the fantastic work, and you can see the names and our contact details here. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna, for this snapshot, sneak preview of the taxonomy study, which will be launched tomorrow. I'm sure that everybody appreciated the opportunity to get this summary directly from the person who's been most involved in it over the last 9 months. For everybody in the audience, you will have the opportunity later to ask Anna some questions if you would like to do that in the Q&A. But I'd like now to give the floor to Michael Bauer and Claudio Cech, who will be talking about our forthcoming work around ESG, which of course is very linked to the taxonomy. It all falls under sustainable finance. Professor Michael Bauer, Dr. Michael Bauer is, he studied at the University of Stuttgart. He's the managing director and partner at Ejendomme. He has a PhD on the simulation of energy saving heating systems, and he has actually been with Ejendomme since 1999. And his professional focus is on providing holistic advice regarding technical, energy-related, environmentally friendly, sustainable, smart, and climate-positive buildings and quarters. And one of his many flagship projects is the new administrative center at the city of Freiburg in South Germany, which was awarded the German Sustainability Prize in 2018 and the DGNB Climate Positive Award in 2019. Michael also holds an honorary professorship at the University of Stuttgart, where he's a lecturer at the Institute of Building Energetics. And he's joined by his colleague Claudio, who's a senior consultant also at Ejendomme. Claudio holds an MSc in Energy and Building Systems Engineering from the Biberach University of Applied Science. Before joining Ejendomme in 2016, he spent a year at Baumann Consulting in Washington, D.C. in the United States, and has been since involved in a series of sustainable real estate developments and certification projects, both in Germany and beyond. Michael and Claudio, the floor is jointly yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Ursula. Yes, we as Ejendomme will support the ESG working group and everyone is talking about ESG, the risks, the benefits, but what is ESG? The most widely and fancy expression to highlight sustainable matters, question mark. Everything is ESG actually, and I have with me my colleague Claudio Chet. He is the real ESG expert, and he will show you our presentation and is ready as well for answers. Claudio.
Thank you. Yeah, so everybody's talking about ESG, and everybody's like, it's like a big mixture of all the topics in it. And if you take a look at, for example, we're showing you at the moment a current study from the World Economic Forum. And what they have done is basically they have asked all the multi-stakeholders to see what kind of risks are threatening their businesses, what kind of risks are threatening the planet, what is humankind facing in terms of challenges. And the good thing is here, they have ranked it based on a likelihood and of course on the impact. And since it would be a very big picture, we said we will focus only, let's say, on the items with the highest likelihood and of course the highest impact. And this is basically the zoom in, as you can see on the right side. And they are differently color coded because we thought about, let's talk about and see what are the major risks in terms of globalization of the world today. And as you can see, we have, for example, in red, the infectious diseases. So I don't think that we have to talk about COVID-19 during this meeting. So I think everybody knows it's currently at the moment a very urgent topics. A lot of nations are dealing with it. And so this is, of course, a major risk, what we see here. But as you can see as well, we do have, for example, the climate action failures, extreme weather events, human environmental damage, and of course a major topic, which of course is also covered in the European Taxonomy at the moment, is the loss of biodiversity and the loss of natural resources. And as you can see with the color coding, all of these risks, all of these major risks could be, let's say, associated with environmental, of the planet. And as you can see, we have on the one hand social risks, which have a very high impact with a very high likelihood, combined the same as well with a very high environmental risks in this case, and as well with the governance criteria. You can see that there are a lot of risks directly showing that if you talk about environmental, social, and governance, that you're already covering all the major risks that could influence your businesses, could influence the planet, and of course the environment. And so this is basically the idea of to say why everyone is, well, let's say why everyone could talk about ESG and why, of course, it is needed to have a discussion to see what is actually ESG and where does it come from. And in this case, the European Union, if you would go to the next slide, please, basically faced this challenge to see what is this environmental risks, how can we assess them, what could be a solution in this case. So, and we all know that there's been a Paris-aligned agreement in 2015 where everyone said we want to limit the global warming. Of course, you have the Sustainable Development Goals, which we have the introduction before with the goal 17 from Bruno in here. And one of the action points in here, as you can see, could be the Commission Action Plan. And it's basically raising three major points here where we would like to focus on. So the first one, which would be the European Taxonomy, which we had now the introduction from Anna, a very interesting part, which actually helps us to raise the question, what is sustainable and what can be seen as sustainable activity? And of course, with it, it requires to disclose some information. And on the other hand, since we have now, let's say, a classification system which helps us to understand what sustainability can be in these projects, we have for the financial world, let's say, a few set of rules how to deal with these things. But in order to assess the risk, we still have the problem, we still have the key challenge to think about what kind of benchmarks can we use to assess these risks? What kind of information do we have to report? What can be useful? What can be necessary in this case? And this is one of the third parts of this so-called Commission Action Plan, that you're talking about ESG and European benchmarks. So it's actually a proposal to discuss what could be used for a risk assessment. And if we take a look at the next slide, in this case, we've tried to visualize what are the key impacts in here, because a lot of people have a different thing in mind when they talk about ESG. A few people say, okay, let's focus on environmental. We talk about biodiversity, cradle to cradle, circular economy. We talk about health and well-being, since we are all a human-centered nation in this case. And of course, on the governance side, we have as well the same with reporting, with compliance, with anti-bribery and all those topics. And so the key thing in here is, what we're trying to show you here is, you have to heavily rely on data. We've seen it before, and with Anna's slides as well, they had to deal a lot of issues with using data for these assessments. And of course, it's the same with ESG. So we have to establish at first what could be ESG used, or what could we use with it. And of course, you can use external sources, internal sources, public data. Benchmarking is a big problem in here. And of course, generic data. So data could be the first step to a possible solution in order to establish how to better manage for the future what sustainability risks in your activity or your businesses or for your projects could mean. And since the market is not sleeping at the moment, we know that there's currently every day a new setup of rules coming out, a new framework, a new benchmark. Tomorrow we will see a final slide on the European Taxonomy, which I'm definitely looking forward to the meeting. And if you go to the next slide, please. We've tried to scheme and schedule for you, probably not all, because if we would include all the frameworks and corporations, we will have to fill a much bigger picture. But just to maybe focus on a few levels here. So on a European level, we have certain initiatives. We have the European taxonomies, we have the Green Deal projects. On a corporate reporting side, we have several institutions like the Global Compact, the Global Reporting Initiative. But this is just to mention a few to see that it's currently at the moment a very wide market, a lot of different active players in here. And of course, everybody of these players and people have a different understanding what is ESG or what could be ESG used for. So talking different references, different benchmarks, and all of those information. And if you go on the next slide, we try to highlight, one more please, one other one. We try to highlight a few key messages here, what we're trying to tell you. So on the one hand, we see there's currently a lack and gap in understanding ESG. Everybody has a different mindset on ESG, and it's really becoming, as we try to see on a building, so it's good if it's getting more green, and it's good if there's coming more nature on it. But as you can see, if you're not caring a lot about the green nature, maybe the trees will overcome the buildings and let's say result in a chaos in this case. So in this case, we're trying to establish an understanding in ESG. And the talk is, of course, to talk about harmonized standards, harmonized risks, benchmarking, reporting. There's a whole variety of how you can use this data. And of course, the entry level, the entry step in here would be to have a more consistent data available, either if it's digital or not digital level. But of course, this is one of the major things that we have to focus in here, to have on the one hand a better understanding, and on the second hand, of course, the better data quality in here. And this brings it basically up to that we've identified now, let's say, a few motivation, a few problems, a few things that we would like to see as a challenge. And this is where we definitely like to welcome you to talk about our Climate Positive Europe Alliance, and where we see that with all this rationale, with all this motivation and the reason behind it, we definitely would like to have a better exchange of experience on a European level. It's a key thing to have a common understanding what perceptions, what views can be used on ESG, how can we maybe integrate all of them into a common understanding, and of course not stay in this chaos of at the moment in market that everybody is trying to establish their own standard, an own definition. I think if we bundle all the creativity, if we bundle all the ideas behind it and establish a higher, more standardized product, in this case, that which could be of course used on several levels, I think this joint evaluation of existing methodologies, tools, and benchmark could definitely help assist to move this forward, and of course to raise the attention, to raise the awareness of this major issue of the ESG. And to talk about how we can do this, if you go one slide more, please. We said about it, okay, we have this Climate Positive Europe Alliance where we bring a lot of key players to one table where a lot of people can express their views, can bring in their knowledge, their expertise, and of course their experience in these cases. And this is what we said, we need to have a working group with these ESG topics in order to move on with this. And of course, we definitely invite all the people who have interest in, who would like to have an experience, who could bring in some information. We definitely would like to ask to join us in this case. So we're not only looking at financial institutions, at pension funds. So we put out a list on targeted group where we see those could be people, or those could be you, helping us to shape this world in this case, and of course to get a standardized standard, have a provision of an input for the sustainable finance platform, and of course the European initiatives, so that we can make sure that our voices, our thoughts in this project will be heard in here, and that we would like to map, of course, the different indicators and systems in order to use this as a unified and harmonized standard. And so the only question would be now, how it's going to be done. What can you do? How can you join us? So on the one hand, we have the link on the website. So please definitely feel free to contact us. In any case, we welcome you. And we thought about, we could use this working group, of course, as part of the CPEA, that we would, for example, start up with 4 to 6 meetings per year on a regular basis. We all know that the sustainability market currently is a lot of development at the moment, and we're definitely looking forward to have a cooperation, have a partnership with your invitations in this case. And of course, in case if we need to certify it, we have to establish a few working groups where reasonable, where of course it makes sense in this case. And the idea would be to present these results on a European level, maybe on the ESG Congress as an annual meeting. And yeah, I'm repeating myself. I think if you're interested in, if you think that you would like to join us, you're definitely welcome, more than welcome. And this would be my closing. Thank you very much for your attention.
Well, thank you very much for the joint Dresden-Sommer team for looking at the GSG landscape in terms of topics, but also in terms of existing tools. And it is a bit of a jungle out there, and I think it would be really, really good to create a little bit more clarity. This is very timely, I think, because over the last week I've been participating in a whole plethora of ESG webinars, training sessions, sometimes zooming in on particular aspects of the 3 letters, the social. I think that's also very important. So this is definitely a very hot topic, and but equally, I think there's still quite a high level of confusion within the market what it actually is. And I think the last presentation now links in very nicely to the 2 previous ones, because I think one of the core challenges that Anna and her study group came across, and that I also, as part of the tech, we came across, and it's not something radically new, but of course for ESG also you need to have some reliable data. So I'm very, very pleased to have Frank Walker here talking about building information and data management. Frank and I have been working on this for some time, and Frank has extensive experience in integrating sustainability aspects into commercial real estate project development. Some notable examples of his involvement include a green shopping mall project of 40,000 square meters, the first French private office building certified as a green building by CPEA, the French Green Building Council certification tool, in 2005. And a 20,000 square meter office building in Munich, which was awarded DGNB Gold certification in 2010. After having done a stint at ICADE, which is a real estate integrated developer, he joined Caisse de Dépôt Group in 2010, where he was in charge of the group's real estate sustainable development policy. And after that, he was head of strategy for the real estate developer group Cortes in France. And since 2019, he's been the Technical and Innovation Director of the French Federation of Real Estate Developers. Frank is president of REHVA and also president of the advisory board of the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors in France, and is involved in many research projects for nearly zero energy buildings and financial indicators for green value, with the Sustainable Building Alliance, AISBL, RSCS, and also the UNEP-FI Property Working Group. Frank, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for this kind presentation. Thank you for the invitation. I'm very pleased to be part of this initiative as a founding member. And I'm here representing today REHVA, which is the Federation of European Heating, Ventilation and Air Conditioning Associations throughout Europe. It's representing something like 120,000 building services engineers, 26 countries throughout Europe. I mean, continental Europe, because we also have friends from Russia, Turkey, and other countries which are not member of the European Union, as Switzerland. So the idea here is really to work since 15 years, really deeply on how to move from technical systems into quality, performance, indoor air quality, system performance, energy performance, greenhouse gas emissions, impact on the envelope, and so on. So this is why REHVA is here with you, because where we spoke about taxonomy, where we spoke about energy performance, greenhouse gas emissions, HVAC is more and more an important part of the systems that we are working with. If you can go next slide, please. Then you will see that what we are focusing on is clearly to work at the European level to help our engineers and members to work with standards and norms at European level. We are also very involved in knowledge dissemination, and for example, I didn't put it here because it's not the case, but we have a task force with more than 200 engineers and researchers dedicated to COVID-19 impact on indoor quality of air and virus dissemination. So it's really a work that is very important. It's also connected worldwide, and we have founded 2 years ago a worldwide organization which is Global Alliance on Indoor Environmental Quality. So we can't talk about energy performance without talking about indoor environmental quality and how we live inside the building, what is the level of comfort we would like to achieve, and this has to be linked to the energy performance, greenhouse gas emission, and so on. Otherwise, we know very well how to be zero emission. It was done 1,000 years ago. You go to the caves, like the troglodyte in Turkey or in other countries. It's zero emission. It's 12 degrees all year long, and you don't emit any greenhouse gas. But this is not what we would like to achieve, in the 21st century. So clearly, we have to understand the needs, work with the comfort we can achieve, and have the best, the impact as the lowest we could in terms of greenhouse gas emission. So this is really an important step for us to work with green building councils in order to cooperate and to have this strong cooperation on translation of data from technical side of HVAC to the green buildings certification systems, and to the approach about the taxonomy in order to have something which is a continuity. If we go next slide, please. The idea clear is, as it was mentioned, is addressing core of data. We need to have to collect the data, and I remember some years ago we already made a guidance for valuers at RICS saying, even if you don't know what you will do with, collect all the data about technical quality of a building. about energy performance, about greenhouse gas emission, because this will be needed to assess the technical quality and the sustainable quality of your building. So we have this challenge to work on a repository and where we can have a look on the whole life cycle building data and inventory. This is key because if we don't know how to get the data, or if it costs too much money to collect the data, then nobody will go inside. So we have to face two big challenges for the data: collection cost and management of the data cost. And the other challenge is to have what we call metadata, which means that if I give an information, I need also to give information about the information. What is the level of uncertainty? How can it? All this data is reliable. Who collect the data? Is he responsible about the collection? Is he responsible about the quality of the data? And so on and so on. If we go next slide, please. Yes, we can go next slide, please. Thank you. So I gave here a very raw example of what it could be if we are talking about data collection for a life cycle of a building in terms of energy and greenhouse gas. It's very rough, I'm sorry about that, but it's just to give you a possibility of overview. The idea is not to talk anymore about taking snapshots of building where we look at what is the status of a building as of today. You have to create movies. The building is a movie. It has a life cycle. You need to collect the data into the life cycle, so you don't know, today have to collect the data to collect inside the movie. That's why I said this this very rough diagram express the life cycle assessment in 50 years, which is the standards that are used in main standards for life cycle assessment. And we tried to show off what happened every year with the uncertainty management according the designed indoor climate class, which is normalized in France, and also what are all the impacts. So it's the bar below where we can have translation into primary energy performance, EPCs, into embodied carbon, into also integration of travel, water, and so on. So if you go next slide, please. The idea also in this approach is to be very transparent on uncertainty, because when you start to manage data, you will never collect all the data and with a high precision of data. You need to manage the uncertainty. So nobody cares if the data is more or less 20%. What is very important is that if you give an information, you have to say this information is to be integrated with a margin of uncertainty of plus minus 20% or plus minus 5%. This is also very important to use standards, as we said. So that's why RICS has worked with an international property measurement standards, for example, just to be clear and transparent about what is the definition of a square meter. I remember 10 years ago, if you went from one side of Europe to the other, you could have 25% of differences just by the different definition of what is a square meter. So as we have a measure which is a kilogram of CO2 equivalent by square meter or kilowatt per hour by square meter, I think it's important to start to say first what is a square meter. And this belongs also to the work that is the subtask according to the taxonomy, because if the taxonomy speaks about greenhouse gas per square meter, then we have to define what is a greenhouse gas emission equivalent and what is a square meter. And again, the idea there is not to be very precise and to spend a lot of money to collect the data or to have very, very, very fine-tuned data. The point is collect the data, whatever it is, with a level of uncertainty behind. And if we go next slide, please. So the second step is really to say, well, we need to have a data analytics approach, because we have to achieve a lot of investments. We know that we will not spend money to collect very, very fine-tuned data. So we need to live with a data lake that we have. So we need analytics that will help us with the uncertainty embedded in the data we have. If we are talking about life cycle assessment, we all know that it's very, very uncertain, but it doesn't matter. It's an information. So you have to take it as it is and translate it into the risk approach, as Claudio said previously. So we need data analytics tools, translation tools into risk, into financial approach, in order for the financial investors and the decision makers to really have a capacity to take the right decision, integrating the sustainability and the performance of a building. Otherwise, they will say, well, we don't trust it, so we leave it aside. And this is what's happening the last 10, 15 years that I started to work in sustainability. A lot of people said, well, it's very, very complicated, so I will just look at the certification brand, and I don't want to know what is behind. I take the brand, but that's I can't integrate inside my valuation process the detailed of the quality of a building. And we know today that if we want to be in accordance with COP25 and the Paris Agreement, we need to give data about greenhouse gas emission. And this data came from the quality of a building and the building in use. So we really have an output of rating the level of certainty from the data we are collecting. And this is what, if we go to the next slide, please. This is what we call when we make this report some years ago with United Nations Environmental Programme Finance Initiative, what we call from the boiler room to the boardroom. It's really to use the data we have and to translate it into a financial decision-making process. So we need to really translate. Otherwise, and this is the big challenge for taxonomy, not to have only raw technical data about energy performance, but to implement it into the financial decision process. And this is, for example, something that is under a process with European Mortgage Federation of Banks, and they start the green mortgage labeling process. And the idea behind is not to have a collection of information, but just to start with energy performance, greenhouse gas emissions, and integrate it into the mortgage process for banks in order to see what is the quality of the whole portfolio of houses where the banks is giving mortgages. So it's a first step. It's not precise, but who cares? We have a first step of information, and we try to separate what is with information, with reliable information, and how we can use it into the risk approach for investors in the coming years. Because as Claudio and Michael Bauer said, the question of ESG is, of course, environment, but it's also governance, and governance is really the poor cowboy in ESG, and we really know to translate it for governance approach. So I will, I think, stop my speech on this approach, because this is the next slide, please. This is really where I would like you to go with data information, working on logbooks, working on pilot development, working on how we can have a building passport implementation with data, even if, as I said again, it's not fully precise or technically perfect. And this is sometimes the mistake we are doing as the technicians, that if it's not technically perfect, we don't want to show it off. But I think really today, this approach on the data analytics and building logbooks is a really important one. And this is where the cooperation with CPEA is really important for REHVA, and also I think for most of the stakeholders around the table. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Frank, for giving us this wake-up call about the importance of data. I would now like to ask a few questions to the panelists, and afterwards participants will have the opportunity to do so as well. I mean, as we've seen, these three presentations are, they are inextricably linked in terms of the topics. We're talking about sustainable finance, but we're talking about one requisite as well, which is the data that holds everything together and makes everything possible. I'd like to start off with firing a question to Anna. You've been working on this taxonomy report for the last 9 months, but I know from personal experience that you've also been involved, you've been very supportive of the development of the tech criteria, providing input. So let's call it at least 2 years. What would be your personal takeaway from the whole process? Developing that criteria, doing the study, and now waiting, of course, for the newly revised criteria. And a second question would be, from my end, you've been working with the already converted, I would say, yeah, in the market. Your market participants, obviously, just by the sheer fact that they were ready and willing to participate in the study, shows that they are already engaged on the subject of sustainable finance and sustainability. And how do you feel with having the experience of the study behind you? How will the rest of the market fare?
So to start with the first, which is easy to answer, it was all about collaboration. It was collaboration amongst the GBCs, getting to understand sort of that the definitions of criteria which we thought were our daily work was at the end then sometimes not as easy, but the most important thing was the collaboration amongst the study participants. So since we had both, I would say, demand and offering side at the table, I started the process by saying, yeah, we will have like 2 or 3 technical workshops, as some training and then some discussion, and then they will be able to fulfill the criteria, to fill out the questionnaires, to get the data. But at the end, we had over weeks a weekly meeting of 2 hours discussing all the details with the banks, with developers, with building owners, with operators, with construction companies. And this was such a important experience for all of them and us, that it was not about just handing out a questionnaire and then it's done, but it's to build up expertise, also learning from each other's how are companies dealing with sustainability in their processes. So as I wrote, the tangible results were reports and recommendations and so on, but the main result of the study was that we had a very unique and new collaborative way of working together, and that everybody is willing to continue working on that also together and open. And as for the second question, I'm not sure whether these were the converted ones, because we have had participants with, sometimes nearly being part of, the technical expert group, or knowing everything and being active in working groups of their organizations. But we also had the other side by saying, I never heard of it, or it's the I don't know. So I just know how to spell taxonomy. And for them, it was, of course, much more difficult. But as for sort of the rest of the market, I think the most important takeaway is not to panic. So banks are currently, I feel the sense of being quite nervous, and they hand this, bring this nervous tension to many others, which is not good, because at the end it's just data, it's just information, and this will be handable at the end. So I'm pretty sure. So don't panic. For all is number one, and then we'll wait for the criteria, and then we'll see. I'm pretty sure it will work out at the end.
Thank you, Anna. I actually have a question here from the audience to Michael and Claudio. What is the reason that the risk in regard to data governance and ESG are not in the upper right corner? One of the outcomes from Mrs. Brana was there was not enough data for the EU taxonomy. Does this mean that the companies who have answered the questionnaire are not aware of the potential of the data in terms of risk and opportunities? And could the lack of governance be also a risk?
That's a very good question. I definitely think that the lack of governance itself would be an ESG risk in this case. And as we had discussed it a lot of times today, or we heard it from multiple things, data is basically, or information is your entry level. So I think a lot of people will, as Anna said it right now, it's an information. They're currently having the fear of missing out, that they're missing actually something where the road is going in this case. So of course, since it's basically a survey of this data, a very representative one, but of course you could match this with a few more points. And I think that at this point, the focus was more on a higher level to say what could be the global risks in this case. So the lack of governance would definitely be one which we should place on the right corner.
Thank you. I would also have a question for Claudio and Michael, because I read this week that apparently, according to UBS, overall assets in ESG funds soared to 1 trillion in 2020. So that's quite staggering. And more net money flowed into ESG funds between April and July 2020 than the entire previous years. Would you say that ESG, from your experience, has also moved center stage in real estate?
Yes, definitely. I think it's in every project we at the moment we start with the clients, with the discussions. The first question is sustainability in ESG. What is it? How can we use it in our project? And we see a recent shift in that a lot of people or investors are shifting on looking at sustainable ways. So before all of this establishment, we always had to discuss with the clients what kind of benefits you have if you engage in sustainability. And now this discussion is, from our experience, been taken already as granted. So it's not that you can choose whether you do something sustainable or not. It's rather that you're already kind of motivated already at the beginning. So we don't have to convince the people to start with sustainability. And it's of course not only to have the benefits of, for example, a sustainable finance with better conditions or better market flows. We also see that, of course, a lot of awareness, a lot of high public profile will come as well here. So I think it's not only a thing on the benefit side, but as well that you have maybe more and more regulations coming up, which could definitely limit your cash flows in these cases, for example.
And again, in addition, we feel a little bit nervous in our clients. So because I remember in the first beginning of green building, DGNB standard, everybody knows what means green building, but nobody knows exactly what is inside. And with the ESG word or with the letters, it's the same. Everybody knows, okay, environmental, social governance, I know what is the mean, but nobody knows the values of the EU taxonomy and how have its influence in the portfolio or the buildings. And I think that's the main reason why ESG is in every news and every thing in the real estate market. There is a lot of unknowledge in the market with this ESG values. And I think the first thing is that we bring more knowledge or transparency in the market. What means ESG? What are the values or the KPIs, and how can we deal with ESG in our normal real estate task every day?
Thank you. Now a few questions for Frank. One question that came from the audience is that whether you have, or whether anybody has actually done an assessment of all the tools in the market that offer opportunities to start documenting data.
Sorry, I didn't get the question.
Okay, I'll repeat it. The participant would like to know whether you've done an assessment of all the tools available in the market that offer opportunities to start documenting data, or if you haven't done it, whether anybody else has done it.
We worked on it, and especially in France, where I'm based. In fact, the question is, first is not the tool. The first question is, what would I like to do with the data? So, for example, we have defined in France a very simple standard of 50 data about a building, but this is the 50 information that you need to have to assess the level of risk and the information for greenhouse gas, energy and sustainability, the minimum information you need to have. And as incredible as it could be, no one has this 50 information. I met a lot of people working with high-level softwares for building information modeling with 3D models, and they can't even extract this 50 information. So because they leave it somewhere in the industry makers, or in the design office, or with engineers, or with the installation, with the construction company. So the point for I think the nervosity also that I feel is that a lot of people are very afraid because they see, oh my God, I will need to invest a lot of money for data collection. So my point to here in answering this question is, don't think like that. Think first which data you need for your clients, and where is the data you need? Who has it? Today, in this world, when we're talking about buildings, all the data are existing because 99% of the components of a building went out of a factory. So if it was done in a factory, you have a data about the components. And especially in the HVAC, the field I know, 100% of information is there. The only point is that there is no continuity, and some data is stuck inside the engineer's office or inside the industry maker. So the question for us is not mapping the tools to collect the data. It's existing already. You have a lot of platforms existing. You have a lot of systems for data collection. It's nothing to invent. It was invented 10 years ago when we started to work with platforms on technical due diligences, the information management. The question is, where is my data? How can I collect it at the lowest cost? So I need to, from the beginning of my design of the building, to think about which data I will need in order to ask the right people to give me this data and not to forget it somewhere. And this is why at the end, a lot of people are nervous and afraid, because if you are thinking about taxonomy at the end of your building construction, it will cost you a lot of money to collect the data again. And this is what we have found in the last 10 years, that people don't like this approach about data, because their experience is that when they start to think about it, it starts with a huge amount of money for data collection. And this is a waste of money. The point is thinking of data the other way around, which data is valuable, and this kind of data I need to ask from the beginning to all the stakeholders of a project.
This is why we need building passports or building logbooks.
Exactly. That's why if you have your building logbook in mind from the beginning, then you will ask all the data to bring the life cycle assessment. And I did the mistake myself when I worked in Munich a couple of years ago for the first building that are certified for the DGNB process. I forgot to ask the data for the life cycle assessment, and it cost me a lot of money to collect it at the last moment when we needed it for the certification. So that's how I learned that I need to ask it from the beginning in the contract at the first step, at the first stage.
Yeah, because data also has value. And with this, I'd like to, I have to, looking at the time, I have to wrap up the panel discussion. There is, in fact, a possibility for all of us to do have a photograph. Raphael could actually make you all panelists, and if you're all panelists, then you will all appear on the screen.